Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into the absolutely bizarre, sometimes hilarious, and honestly deeply tragic collision between our rigid legal system and, well, the supernatural world. We're going to look at exactly what happens when the very literal black and white language of the law is forced to confront the absolute limits of physical reality.
So let's just jump right in. Have you ever wondered when you legally have to disclose that your house is haunted? Or better yet, can you actually sue the devil in federal court? I know it sounds exactly like the setup to a joke, right? But these are real questions that actual judges and lawmakers have had to genuinely grapple with over the years. Section 1. Legislating the supernatural. Regulating the unseen world.
To really set the stage here, you have to realize the absurdity of supernatural laws is a completely global phenomenon. For instance, in San Francisco, a standard fortune-telling permit actually covers necromancy. Yeah, literally the manipulation of the dead. Down in Texas, you are totally free to hunt Bigfoot simply because he's not listed as a game animal. Over in Iceland, the local elf lobby, yes, you heard that right, has halted actual road construction to protect the hidden folk. And it's not just folklore. In the famous 1991 New York case, Stombovsky v. Ackley, a home seller was required to disclose that their property was haunted by poltergeists. The court even joked the buyer hadn't a ghost of a chance. And on a massive geopolitical scale, the Chinese government legally demands that Tibetan Buddhist monks apply for a reincarnation license. Just wild stuff.
Section 2. Mayo versus Satan. Miscellaneous docket number 5357. Because while passing a quirky local law is one thing, trying to drag a metaphysical entity into a federal courtroom is a whole different ballgame. Picture this. The year is 1971. A 22-year-old state prisoner named Gerald Mayo, who was locked up at the maximum security Western Penitentiary in Pittsburgh, drafts a handwritten pro se legal complaint. He outright claimed that the devil, along with his subordinate ministers, had violated his constitutional rights. Mayo argued that Satan had caused him severe misery, made unwarranted threats, placed deliberate obstacles in his path, and ultimately caused his entire criminal downfall.
Section 3. The Procedural Masterclass. Judge Weber's Brilliant Breakdown. Now, you'd probably expect a federal judge to toss a lawsuit against Satan straight into the trash, right? Well, instead, federal judge Gerald J. Weber issued a brilliant, formal written opinion that is literally still taught in civil procedure textbooks today. He didn't get bogged down debating theology. He just applied the federal rules of civil procedure to this totally impossible scenario. To rule on this, Judge Weber addressed a vital threshold issue: personal jurisdiction. Under the Due Process Clause, a court needs minimum contacts over a defendant to have legal authority. But, as the judge pointed out, Satan has no physical residences, no business transactions, and no localized conduct in Western Pennsylvania, making personal jurisdiction a constitutional impossibility. He even playfully brought up a famous Stephen Vincent Benet story where the devil claimed American citizenship, but noted that since the devil hadn't actually appeared in his court to assert sovereign immunity, the judge couldn't rule on it. Mayo also made a really clever procedural move. Because he was locked up and broke, he filed to proceed under informa pauperis status. This is legal jargon that basically means the court would waive his standard filing fees. But here's the kicker. It also shifted the statutory burden of executing the service of process, which is physically handing the lawsuit to the defendant, directly onto the United States Marshal Service. So you gotta ask yourself, how exactly does a U.S. Marshal serve a subpoena to the underworld? It's a massive logistical nightmare for the government. Mayo completely failed to provide any physical address, contact details, or, a map to hell. The court dryly noted that the federal marshals were entirely incapable of serving the summons, and that procedural failure is what ultimately forced the formal denial of Mayo's petition. And it gets even wilder. Mayo didn't just want this lawsuit for himself. He requested a Rule 23 class action to cover all human beings suffering from demonic influence. Judge Weber actually noted that Mayo met 3 of the 4 legal requirements to represent all of fallen humanity. The class of people was definitely numerous, the grievances of temptation were common to everyone, and Mayo's misery was pretty typical, but it failed on that crucial 4th requirement. The judge ruled that an incarcerated, self-represented layperson simply couldn't adequately protect the complex legal interests of all humanity against the Prince of Darkness. Section 4. The Hidden Human Toll. The real meaning behind the metaphor. This is where things take a serious turn. Because while suing Satan seems like a hilarious historical oddity, it actually masks a profoundly dark reality. Gerald Mayo wasn't just confused. His lawsuit was a desperate metaphor. When you look past the literal words of his satirical complaint, things like demonic influence, misery, and deliberate obstacles, you find the grim reality of his life. Mayo was enduring horrific, unconstitutional conditions inside Western Penitentiary. Historical records from a major class action lawsuit around that same time reveal that inmates there were subjected to starvation diets, extreme physical abuse, and were locked in vermin-infested subterranean solitary confinement cells that didn't even have basic plumbing or heating.
Mayo was actually an active jailhouse lawyer and part of the Imprisoned Citizens Union. He used this completely bizarre petition as a highly sophisticated, satirical legal weapon. Why? To force a federal judge to acknowledge the systemic cruelty of the prison administration. Lacking any formal political representation and facing a brick wall of administrative indifference, inmates like Mayo used satire to get eyes on their suffering. He was essentially asking the court a heartbreaking question. If the law absolutely refuses to protect me from the very real physical misery of this prison cell, maybe it can hold the Prince of Darkness accountable instead.
Unfortunately, the rise of these kinds of creative, metaphorical inmate filings led to strict legislative gating. Fast forward to 1996, and Congress enacts the Prison Litigation Reform Act, or PLRA, specifically to curb what they viewed as frivolous lawsuits. What does that mean for us today? It means modern courts are now legally required to automatically screen and immediately dismiss these desperate pleas. For example, look at a 2026 case called Moon v. Satan, where a plaintiff sought $7 billion for supernatural terrorism. The court just immediately dismissed it as patently insubstantial. There was no thoughtful engagement, absolutely no procedural masterclass from a judge, just an automatic deletion from the docket.
Section 5. Deities in the Docket, a Comparative History.
It turns out bringing mythological entities into secular courtrooms is a surprisingly international pastime. Across the globe, courts handle this in almost exactly the same way. In Nebraska, Senator Ernie Chambers actually sued God for making terroristic threats via natural disasters. The judge dismissed it simply because God has an unlisted address. In India, a lawyer sued Lord Ram for cruelty to his wife Sita. The court dismissed it, demanding physical witnesses that obviously couldn't be produced. Over in Romania, a man sued God for breach of his baptismal contract to protect him from the devil. Again, dismissed for lack of a physical address. And in Saudi Arabia, a family even filed a Sharia court claim against a genie for stealing their cell phones and throwing rocks at them. Across all these different jurisdictions, judges consistently rely on basic procedural loopholes to avoid bridging that gap between the physical and spiritual worlds. Which really brings us to the heart of this entire explainer. We want to leave you with this final thought to consider about who actually gets access to the justice system today. Back in 1971, Judge Weber took the time to dignify a desperate incarcerated man's metaphorical cry for help with a real, educational, legal response. Today, an algorithm or an automatic screening process just throws it out without a second thought. So, in our modern, hyper-focused pursuit of judicial efficiency, what other human truths are we automatically screening out of existence? Thank you so much for joining us, and keep questioning the systems around you.